Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 63, 2017 in Memoriam. Hey, Chris McBrien here. This is Pop Goes Your World. I'm with Yancy Eaton. Yancy, this isn't one of our favorite topics to mention this week. I know that.
Nope, it is not. I don't even know what else to say.
I know. Because we were talking before we came on, and we're like, you know what? This is not our favorite topic to do. You know, when we got to talk about, we'll look back on the people that we lost in the last year, but it is something that we've done in the past, so we decided to do it again this time. It's never easy to say goodbye to some of our favorite pop culture icons, for lack of a better word. But I think it's important to talk about them, and especially for me, I always like talking about some of the lesser lights, and I'm sure we'll touch on some big names tonight, but I also like to touch base on some of the, like I say, some of the lesser lights, actors and, musicians and things like that just meant something to me. But before we get started, I did want to give a little shout out here. I did a guest appearance on another podcast this week. Yancy, sorry, I didn't mean to go behind your back on another show. It was, yeah, I know. Actually, you were busy, as you know. So I just want to give a shout out to Perry and Lindsay Johnson. So they do a show called the Pod Stuff Podcast. And what they do is they interview they interview other podcasters and they review other podcasts, and they're just basically, the reason why they're doing what they're doing is to just try and promote other podcasters. And I just thought it was really cool, and I had connected with them through social media, and then they invited me to come on the show. So I recorded it last night. I will send things out on Twitter, as to when that show comes out. It hasn't been released yet, but, you can go over there and hear me talk. The other thing is, though, I did want to give them a shout out, because it's not just that show. They do another show, and they started this podcast a couple of years ago, and you talk about like an interesting concept. It's called Hello Life WTF. And it started with them basically talking about marital issues and things like that, and deciding to kind of work their way through their personal problems through by turning on a microphone and talking about it. And they record it as a show. And
that's brave.
I know. Isn't that something? But it's one of those things that takes bravery, like you say, but it's also where other people can step up and listen to it and go, hey, wow, I'm going through kind of the same thing like that. I think it's an incredible show. So it's called Hello Life WTF, Perry and Lindsay Johnson. Anyone out there, give it a chance. Give it a listen. It's a very, very interesting show. And while you're at it, look up the Pod Stuff Podcast, and you can listen to dear old me talking. Actually, you know what? Maybe just skip that, because you don't want to hear me anymore. But anyway, are you ready to get into our 2017 look back year in Memoriam?
Just really quickly, I just wanted to touch base on a couple things I was getting into.
Sure.
We talked about Blade Runner, if you recall, in a past episode.
Yep.
I think K-Man was actually on that episode. I finally got to see the new Blade Runner 2049. My wife bought it for me in 4K, so I kind of own it forever.
Nice.
And it was fantastic. It was very, very fantastic. I would implore you to kind of, I don't know, maybe watch it at some point, because I do think it's really, really awesome. It's true to the original, which I knew you weren't high on, but I absolutely loved it. Also, another thing that I've mentioned multiple times in the past on this show is the Netflix series Black Mirror. Season 4 came out. Mm-hmm. It is fantastic. There's only a couple of episodes, but it's amazing. And we're, 4 or 5 days into the new year, and on my second book of the year, I read a lot, Chris. That's one thing that I just do every day. It's a non-negotiable in my family. And I've decided to take it up a notch this year. I'm going to try to read something like 50 books in a year, which I know is almost not going to happen, but it's the journey and not the end result. So I was just curious if you had any type of, pop culture related New Year's resolutions, or just any resolutions in general you wanted to touch on.
So what I try to do is, ever since I've started doing this podcast with you, to try to watch a bit more millennial stuff, because otherwise I just watch everything from like the 70s and 80s. As you know, I just watch Meatballs over and over again. And, I got to expand my horizons a little. So one of the things I did recently, and we talked about on the podcast, was I started watching Breaking Bad with my wife. And so my New Year's resolution is I want to binge watch that as soon as we get done off the air tonight, me and you, because I want to just binge watch the last season. We've made it through 4 seasons, got to the end of season 4. I don't want any spoilers from you, Yancy. I know you've seen it. I got to the end of season 4 and I'm like, okay, that's it. This series is over. And then I'm like, oh, there's another season left. Like, I can't believe it. Like, it should be over. It's like, he's like, okay, I won, and it's like, okay. So like, I have to know what happens in this last season. So that's my New Year's resolution, is to watch Breaking Bad, the last season, and just binge watch it all and see how it is. So
I strongly endorse that. It's one of my favorite shows of all time, if not my most favorite. And I still have moments, Chris, where I randomly mourn the loss of Breaking Bad being over. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, it has that much meaning for me. So I'm totally on board with that.
It's really, really good. And I don't talk
like
too highly.
Anything?
Yeah, I don't talk too highly about too many millennial things. Maybe we should do a show on Breaking Bad sometime. Once I get done, we'll do it.
I'd love that. Yeah,
and then we'll also do a show on Stranger Things 2, and we'll bring on our buddy Nate Dawkins. So I'll give in. I'll watch a couple more millennial things and we'll talk about it. But in the meantime, let's get started with this.
All right, let's do it.
I wanted to go back and watch The Love Boat.
I'm going to give you a lot of reasons to think I'm nerdy tonight.
I've never actually watched Alf.
Jerry Seinfeld's mother.
We were actually just talking about Alf in my house last week.
And I knew you'd be on my side about all this.
Chris, he normally has the textbook answer.
The Love Boat.
He obviously has not read the science fiction textbook.
Very cool.
But is it, Chris? But is it cool?
Oh, settle down, young man.
I do love this movie.
And yes, Yancy, it is cool, by the way. Okay, so Yancy, do you want to kick things off for us? We'll just kind of go back and we'll just have a conversation. We obviously, every year goes by, we lose a lot of, pop culture icons, through the course of the year. And I think it's important to look back and kind of touch base on some of those people that we lost and what they meant to us personally. So do you want to kick things off? In
sure.
no particular order. We're not going to try and, work our way up or work our way down. Let's just throw some names out there and talk about people that meant a lot to us.
Okay, sure. So this one, it's kind of like a blanket where my first foray into this conversation is I just want to touch base on a couple of names that weren't necessarily super huge to me, as far as like, I wasn't really into these people because it was before my time, before my prime, like growing up or anything, but they were names that were so iconic with like film and pop culture, and for all of them to kind of pass in the same year, it was actually kind of wild. But like the names like Mary Tyler Moore and Don Rickles, those are names that I've known forever, and I really can't tell you like a ton of the works. Like, I know about Mary Tyler Moore's show, but the fact that she passed away, who are some other ones like Jerry Lewis, like people that I had seen and I knew of on TV that had passed away forever. And I know just like from speaking with family and stuff, this kind of hit them a lot more than it did me. Is just seeing people that were so synonymous with TV, and they had their hands in so many different projects, and they had longevity. That's what I think of whenever I think of these three names, is just they were on TV for so long. I know there's a lot of lesser actors and actresses and celebrities and TV hosts and whatnot where they kind of had a really short run. It was a very, very short amount of time that you'd see them on TV or in movies. But these were three names that were just so iconic, and to go on their IMDb page and just see all the stuff that they're involved in, it's kind of crazy that they were gone. I remember watching the opening monologue that Jimmy Kimmel did one night on his show, and I don't know if you watch Jimmy Kimmel. I don't think you do, Chris. Do you?
No, not really. I like Jimmy Kimmel. I used to watch him when he was on Win Ben Stein's Money, and I used to think, man, that guy's funny. And then he did the Man Show with Adam Carolla. Man, those guys made me laugh. Jimmy Kimmel's one of the funniest people going. And now that he's almost gotten a little bit more political and things like that too. And his thing, I like him a lot. I think he's a good guy.
I like him too. I like we've talked about this too. Like, I'm the biggest David Letterman fan. I'm the Dave Letterman apologist, and I feel like this new crop of late night hosts is kind of weak, and they kind of pander to people, and they go for like the easy stuff. But I'll give Jimmy Kimmel credit. He does a lot of stuff that isn't immensely popular or isn't universally accepted. Like you said, like going super political and challenging things, which I just genuinely appreciate. But he did an opening monologue where he talked about Don Rickles and about how they became friends just because Don Rickles knew how big it was to host the Tonight Show, how big it was, or not the Tonight Show, but just a late night show in general. And just like the stories that he had back and forth about how he would send him, flowers whenever he would host the Oscars, and all the jokes that he would make, just like what an awesome person he kind of was. And you get this idea of people just because of the parts that they play, that's how they are in real life. And, Don Rickles was always kind of like this ornery, just like this surly dude in a lot of the parts that he played. But in actuality, like, he was this genuinely warm, like, soul. And that's kind of what Jimmy Kimmel was talking about. Like I said, it's kind of weird for me to mention these names, but I kind of grouped them together simply because like they were all in like this era. And just the fact that they lasted as long as they did, I just wanted it to be acknowledged. Mm-hmm.
No, and a few of those names will come up for sure. So one name that I want to throw out there is Richard Hatch. And I'm not talking about the guy from the first season of Survivor. No, not the millennial Richard Hatch, Yancy, but the Gen X Richard Hatch. Yes, the one and only Apollo from Battlestar Galactica. Not the millennial Battlestar Galactica, Yancy, but the Gen X Battlestar Galactica. This is getting too complicated, I tell you. When I was a kid, I loved watching Battlestar Galactica on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock. It was on, like, so we're talking like 1978, 1979. Richard Hatch played Apollo, and he died in 2017, the past year, and I'm sad. I was, as a kid, I absolutely loved that TV show. I've mentioned that before on the podcast, if you remember. And I just really, really liked that show a lot. And so Richard Hatch was on there with Dirk Benedict. They were brothers, Apollo and Starbuck. And Richard Hatch died this past year. And so for me, it was like a piece of my childhood kind of went away because I really, really, really loved that show a lot. So he's one of the lesser names, like I mentioned, off the top of the show, that I think he deserves a little bit of a shout out. So I wanted to give him a shout out.
So I'm Googling him as you talk about him, which I do with most things that you mentioned because I don't know what they are. And I'm not going to lie. I don't even recognize his face. Like I'm looking at the parts and stuff he's in. I haven't Battlestar Galactica.
He basically didn't do anything else. He did Battlestar Galactica, and that was about it. Before that, he was like did some soap operas, and that was about it. He was a soap opera actor, he auditioned for that part, got it. He was good in that, kind of typecast in it. Wasn't it the greatest actor? That's for sure. It was just something about that show. I don't know what it was, because I was a big Star Wars fan when it came out, obviously in 77, and I was mesmerized by Star Wars as any 7-year-old would be, at the time. And so anything even space related, I would watch. And Battlestar Galactica was a big one for me. I always liked it. So
really interesting. Just curious, how long did Battlestar Galactica run?
Oh, like 2 seasons, and then they came out with Battlestar Galactica 1980, and they were on Earth, and they drove around in motorcycles, and it was really, really bad.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is a deep cut, and you're right. The only thing that you said before the show was that, I'm going to name some names that you are definitely not going to make, the show, which I appreciate. So, all right. So I guess I'll talk about my next one, and I did mention him in a past show as well, and it's Chester Bennington. He's the lead singer of Linkin Park. This is one of those bands where it was kind of I hate using the whole like rap rock because it's kind of got like this weird name because it didn't age particularly well as a genre. But Linkin Park was one of the pioneers of that. They were this alternative metal, new metal, hard rock, rap rock kind of thing. However you want to, package it, to make it kind of, understandable to people who don't really listen to the music. But Linkin Park for the last 25 years has quietly been like one of the biggest bands of, in the entire world. They've literally sold tens of millions of records. Critical acclaim by a lot of theirs, like their albums Meteora and Hybrid Theory were one of the best, most listened to albums of my youth. And it's really weird. It's weird whenever people like this pass away, just because you feel like certain memories where they were kind of like they were the soundtrack to your life because you were just listening to them while things were going on, and it makes you think back to all of those things. And I feel like nostalgia is sometimes overrated, but sometimes it's actually exactly what you need. It's just to think back on things and think of them fondly. And the nature in which he died was super, super sad, because this is a guy who was in his early 40s, seemingly on top of the world, and has a wife, has I think 5 or 6 kids. Like, this is a family man, super loving, does tons of stuff for charity, and obviously was struggling with a lot of mental demons and actually hung himself, which is really, really confounding. It's just sad to think about it, and I don't have this whole show is going to be awkward like this because it's just weird to like wrap a bow on something that you're saying, but it was just really sad because this was somebody that was so seminal to basically everybody around my age group. Everybody listened to Linkin Park. They were edgy, they were different, and like I said, they blended so many different musical elements. At one point, he was actually the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots, which I don't know if you're familiar with them much, but he did a couple of alternate projects and stuff that were pretty good, not very commercially successful. But I just always thought he was an immense talent. He could scream, he could do clean vocals amazingly, and I'm just really kind of sad that he's gone. I don't know if you've ever got the chance to listen to Linkin Park music, Chris. Have you?
Not really, no.
No. Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that you'd enjoy it, but like I said, there was a time there where they were one of the biggest bands in the world.
And so why do you think I wouldn't enjoy it?
Just because there's a lot of screaming. It's kind of it's a little heavier.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But such is life.
A lot of screaming in it, so I'm not going to like that. Are you familiar with George A. Romero and his work at all?
I am not.
Okay, so one of the movies I am going to get you to watch is 1968's Night of the Living Dead. When we go back to some of our movies when we challenge each other, I've mentioned it on the podcast before when we talked about horror movies. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It was directed by George A. Romero. And it was sort of one of the original zombie movies. And the cool thing with the movie is he made it on for $35 grand. back in 68, that was more than today's 35 grand, but still, he made it for nothing, right? And he went to Pittsburgh and he got like local cops to be in it. And he got some actors and he got some other people just to be extras and stuff in it. And it was so, so phenomenal. It's a minimalistic movie. It's just so good, man. And it's black and white. So, I don't know if you'll be able to sit through a black and white movie, Yancy, or not. Maybe we can play Linkin Park in the background and all the screaming and it'll bring up the speed. But, George A. Romero died last year and he moved up to Canada. He was up here in Toronto. Maybe it was the cold that got him. I don't know, but he was great. And so he not only directed that movie, but then he went on to have this sort of trilogy with Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. And then he also made a movie, one of my favorite sort of horror comedy movies of all time, if you can call it that. It was Creepshow from 1982. Have you ever heard of that one?
I have not, no.
Oh, man, Creepshow is so good. So he collaborated with Stephen King, and they wrote a bunch of sort of...
Oh, cool.
The kind of short sketches in it, and it's almost like reading a comic book. It kind of morphs into like comics and kind of comes back, and it's kind of funny in places and spoofy in other places and scary as hell in other places. Like, it's really, really good. George A. Romero is kind of the godfather of a lot of stuff that's going on now. Like when you watch things like The Walking Dead and things like that, The Walking Dead would not exist if it was not for George A. Romero. And so for that reason, I got to give him a shout out because he was an influential guy and I liked a lot of his work.
I like the deep cuts, Chris. I really do. This is 2 for 2 that I haven't heard of, but I like where your heart's at. I do. Okay, so the next one for me, as soon as I say this, people are going to like roll their eyes or whatever, but I want to lay out exactly why I'm mentioning him, and it's Hugh Hefner. So just as an aside, I've never purchased a Playboy. I may have seen one or two in my entire life, but I've never personally owned a Playboy magazine.
I just read them I just get it for the articles.
For the articles, right? Yeah. Like everybody else, yeah. These are gentlemen that read Playboy, correct?
Yeah, of course.
So I ended up actually doing a lot of research.
Instead, I usually pick up a couple copies of Swank or 40 Plus.
Or a Jugs magazine, yeah, exactly. Or something, right? I'm trying to think of like the grungy, nasty ones. But,
oh man.
Anyways, so like I said, after he had died, I kind of had like a postmortem one where I was reading a bunch of think pieces and articles from a bunch of my favorite writers who were just kind of reflecting on why he was so culturally significant, and I didn't really understand what he kind of meant to not just the feminist movement but also free speech. And then doing a lot of background on it, I kind of found out that like this guy was really involved with like politics and with civil rights and stuff. In 1966, he sent a writer, a black woman, to interview George Lincoln Rockwell. So he was one of the founders of the American Nazi Party, and people would basically give him the title of like the American Hitler. So I thought it was incredibly like daring that here Hugh Hefner would literally send a journalist who was African American in descent, and that was the person he chose to interview them. And the interview itself was very, very interesting. There were things like, he was arrested for, producing like lewd conduct. Basically, back in those days, you could be arrested for doing such things as like posting nude photos of women. So like was he a little exploitative? Was he basically getting rich off of the the backs and legs, no pun intended, of like women? Possibly, but I also feel like there was a part of him that very much did care for the issue as far as like promoting social issues, promoting progressive values and really giving people a voice who didn't have a voice before. And it gave me like this whole newfound appreciation for him that I had never known was there. So like this is a guy who honestly, he risked a lot. He took chances, and it was at the expense of, his own public reputation. And he put in his own money in these things. Like it was a huge gamble at the time whenever there was all this legal gray area as to what he was doing, if he was violating, all these different laws and stuff. It's just the fact that he was a pioneer during a time in the 60s whenever it was very, very scary to be an activist of any type. And, like I said, was it possibly exploitative? Was his intentions 100% true? I'm not 100% sure either, but I just love the fact that there's two sides to every person, and depending on what aisle you fall on, this man was either a hero or an absolute devil. But I just thought it was really interesting, and all the things that I read about people quoting about how pivotal he was to civil rights. I just wanted to kind of give him a nod. So again, I'm not like this dude that like collects vintage Playboys or something, but I just thought he needed a nod.
Yeah, I don't like those guys that collect vintage Playboys either. So by the way, I mentioned George A. Romero, and I would be remiss if I didn't also mention Tobe Hooper, because Tobe Hooper died last year, and he was a great director too, and he directed the classic horror movie, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. I'm talking about the original, not the remade millennial one there, Yancy, but the one from 1974.
Right, I haven't seen that.
So good. And he also directed Poltergeist. And again, not the remake crap, but the one from 1982. He didn't do a lot. Didn't direct other than those two movies. Like, he did The Funhouse, and that was about it, really. But God, he was good. He had a really, really cool style. And I think just for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre alone, he deserves a shout out. But a couple of other guys I want to talk about are two game show hosts. Okay. Very, very different ends of the spectrum. One is a Canadian, Monty Hall. Have you ever heard of Monty Hall? He's from Winnipeg.
I have not heard of Monty
He was
Hall.
He was the host of the long-running game show Let's Make a Deal. And again, not the millennial Let's Make a Deal, but the Gen X Let's Make a Deal. And he was, like I say, he was from Winnipeg. He's Canadian. Great voice, like outstanding voice, great personality. Like, he's just this unbelievably likable guy. So if you get a chance, you can go on to YouTube, Yancy, and just look up like Monty Hall on Let's Make a Deal. Is so good. And I like Wayne Brady. You know, he does the new one. Wayne Brady's awesome. You know, Whose Line Is It Anyway is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. But Wayne Brady's good, but man, Monty Hall, oh, he was so good. And the other guy I want to just mention was Chuck Barris. So Chuck Barris did this show back in the 70s called The Gong Show. Okay. And it was quite a pop culture staple at the time. So what they did, Yancy, was Chuck Barris was the host. Okay. And it was sort of, if you really think about it, in a lot of ways, it was kind of like the original reality show. Because what they did was they had a panel of 3 people. J.P. Morgan was always on the panel. She was like a nobody. It was like all these Z-list celebrities. And so these 3 people were on this panel, and they'd bring regular people on the show. It was like a talent show. And they would bring people on to do whatever talent that they wanted. They'd come on and they would juggle, or they would come on and sing, or whatever. And then the 3 people in the panel would either wait and let them finish and then give them a rating, like 1 to 10, and then whichever one had the most points at the end won a prize, right? Or they would get up and gong them. If they were so bad they wanted them off the show, they'd hit this great big huge gong, and it meant they had to stop, and then they'd pull them off the stage.
So there's literally a gong in the Gong Show?
A huge gong, and they'd have to go up and gong it. And so anyway, it was just a campy, fun, crazy thing. But Chuck Barris was a little bit more than just that, because Chuck Barris had all this weird stuff going on with him where he was or he wasn't involved with the CIA, and he was like a spy and all. Like, it was just, he's so weird. And millennial, there you go, millennial in 2002, Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, with your guy Sam Rockwell. You know the movie I'm talking about? It's about Chuck Barris.
I know of it, but I haven't actually seen it.
It's a movie about Chuck Barris and about Chuck Barris's life. So you have to look that up sometime.
Yes,
he was just like this most bizarre guy, and like he was or wasn't involved in all this stuff, but he was just interesting and definitely a pop culture icon from the 1970s. So I just wanted to give him a shout out as well.
Very cool. As an aside, we're going to have to do an in memoriam to my neighbor's dog if it does not stop barking.
Okay,
like this is not good radio, so I'm very sorry.
We'll just do the 2018 in memoriam right now.
Yeah, let's do it. Rest
good.
in peace, neighbor's dog.
Yep.
Okay, so this next one, again, not to...
You know what else is going to die in 2018? When my wife hears this podcast, my stack of collectible Playboys.
Oh, Chris.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. You're in a good mood tonight. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm like feeling like this really great energy from you. I don't know if anybody else will pick up on it, but...
probably not.
All right, so for my next one, not to completely lessen and, I don't know, kind of water down each person's life, but just to throw a couple of names in, because it's more or less not all of them was like super, super important to me individually, but I wanted to acknowledge them just because from a musical standpoint, they were very, very important. Malcolm Young, which I know you probably listen to AC/DC. Malcolm Young, he was, I believe, the electric guitarist, and he was one of the original founders of the band. He was with them for a long time. He passed away this year.
Yeah, he was the rhythm guitar player. He was really the backbone of that band.
Yeah, rhythm guitar, sorry.
Yeah.
So Greg Allman from the Allman Brothers, I first discovered them from Guitar Hero, playing Jessica, and then, unearthed their whole catalog.
A little piece of trivia for you. Did you know that he was once married to Cher?
I did not know that.
Holy cow. There you go.
No, okay, that was excellent. You should have kept that for trivia. But
yeah.
What about Jay Giles? Centerfold was one of the coolest, most risque songs.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
Freeze Frame's amazing too. a very underrated
You're
harmonic
just bringing
player.
up Centerfold because of my stack of Playboys, right?
Yeah, that was actually a really nice segue. I should have led with that, and it would have been even more perfect. But another couple of musical artists like Chuck Berry, obviously he passed away. We mentioned him before. Fats Domino, and then Chris Cornell, who I also mentioned. He died, and he was the lead singer of Audioslave and Soundgarden. And I think he maybe have had a couple smaller projects, but one of the coolest voices of the rock movement ever. And I just wanted to give him a nod as well. All these like artists, they weren't super, super big, and they won't get the fanfare that some of the other large artists like last year, Prince, I literally talked about him, I think half the episodes we recorded last year. But I just felt like giving them a nod. One last one is Paul O'Neill. I don't know if you've ever heard of or listened to Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Have you, Chris?
No. Paul O'Neill used to play with the Yankees as far as I was concerned.
Correct. This is a different one.
Yeah.
Maybe not the exact same one, but Trans-Siberian Orchestra, it's literally just that. It is a gigantic orchestra that also integrates like rock and roll, and they have electric guitar and an actual drum set. Really, really interesting music, super cool. I know it's not for everybody, but there was a period of my time, in my life where I was very, very interested in that, and he was the founder, and I'm kind of afraid that it's going to like that whole group is going to be no more just because he did pass away. And lastly, there's a rapper. He's what they call like a SoundCloud rapper, where they basically started out by dropping mixtapes for free on SoundCloud, which people could listen to. He has like a bunch of face tats, or he had a bunch of face tats, and rapped a lot about like substance abuse and just, depression. And this was a guy that was obviously really struggling with a lot of issues and a lot of demons, and, very clearly asking and hoping for help. And, unfortunately he was 21 years old and overdosed on his tour bus. Somebody that I considered like the next up and coming star in rap music, which I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but I genuinely mean that. Like, he was super, super talented. His outward, appearance was a little jarring to some people. He would dye the hair like Eminem, but he also had like literally face tattoos all over him, but really, really sound as a technical rapper. And he passed away as well. So I hate to, like I said, denigrate them by kind of lumping them together, but I just wanted to give each one of them their own due.
Very good. So I'm going to go with two guys that have a very similar name. I want to give these guys a shout out. That's John Hurt and John Hurd. Okay, so just hear me out on this one. So John Hurt is a guy, I always liked him, and you know him, Yancy, because you liked that movie Alien. Remember Alien?
Yes.
He's the guy that had the thing on his face, and then it came out of his stomach. Remember?
The face hugger? Yep.
Yeah, so that was John Hurt. And I liked him too because he was in a lot of other movies. He was in, jeepers, what else did he do that was good? He was actually Aragorn's voice in the animated Lord of the Rings. I mean, it was crappy, but he did do it, which was really important. And he also was in 1984. But one of my favorite roles that he had was, and he was also in The Elephant Man. He played John Merrick in The Elephant Man. Man, he was good. But he played Jesus in History of the World Part 1, which was Mel Brooks' movie. And it's a small part, but it was so funny.
Is it a comedy?
Oh, yes, it's a comedy. It's so memorable. He plays Jesus in this part. So he's at the Last Supper, and then Mel Brooks is there. And Mel Brooks is taking the orders of everybody. He's like the waiter, and he's taking everyone's order at the Last Supper. And he bangs his foot, and he's like, "Oh, Jesus." And then John Hurt's like, "Yes." And he's like, "Oh, well, whatever." And then he's like, does something else and makes, "Oh, Christ." And Jesus is like, "Yes. Well, what can I do for you?" And it's just this stupid scene back and forth. But I always liked John Hurt because he could do comedy. He could do, serious stuff. So I really, really liked him a lot. And John Hurd, you probably remember best. He was the dad in Home Alone. And he really broke out a couple years before that when he did Big. And he was in Big. But before that, he did all these like kind of sort of second-rate sci-fi movies like Cat People and Chud and stuff like that. And so I knew of him then because I liked those movies. But then when he came out with Big, he kind of became big. That was his big break, right? But both those guys were good actors, and they were in a lot of important stuff for me, and when I was growing up in the 80s. So I wanted to give those guys a shout out.
Very cool. You mentioned, what was the film? The Jesus, what was it?
The History of the World Part 1.
History of the World Part 1.
Yeah.
I was just like, I always Google stuff as you're talking just so I can make notes of it and kind of like go back later and screw around and stuff. I did not realize that Mel Brooks is still alive and kicking at 91 years old. Not to be like, an air of morbidity to me, but holy cow, like he is still alive. I did not know that.
There you go. Well,
Yeah, so last one I want to talk about too. Also, I forgot to mention one more musical name in the last batch, but Glenn Campbell, not one of my personal favorites, but definitely like a country stalwart in my family. I probably know 50 of his songs and can sing them end to end, just because anytime we'd ever have a family function, we're listening to two things. We're listening to classic rock, or we're listening to country. That's just where I come from. That's what my family has always listened to. So just a nod to him as well for pumping out the hits, as you will, as the kids might say. I don't know. Lastly, there's one person that I was dying to talk about, and if you have somewhere, that's fine. You can just kind of rattle them off at the same time. Yep. But it's Tom Petty, and I know that's not a surprise because I've mentioned him a couple times, just as I did Prince. For me personally, he's literally on like Yancy's Mount Rushmore as far as like musical acts that I care the most about. And I'm not going to delve too much into it because I feel like I've kind of beat this horse as much as I possibly can. But I'm literally sitting here right now, as corny as it sounds, but I'm wearing a Tom Petty Full Moon Fever T-shirt right now, and it's sad that he's gone, just because I felt like he was actually still making a lot of really good music. And anytime you have an artist or an actor or any person that was involved in some piece of pop culture, like you're mentioning some really esoteric stuff, at least to me, right? Stuff I've never heard of.
Right. But
the reason why you're mentioning these people is because you had like a very visceral, a very real, ethereal connection to whatever it was that they were a part of, right? Mm-hmm. Tom Petty's a little different because he is very famous and a lot of people know him, but even still, like and I've said this before, but I always feel like Tom Petty has been incredibly underrated, overshadowed by other musical acts of his time. He was always kind of doing things his way, and as such, like, he was never like the trendy thing. He was never, making a ton of number one hits. He was just always kind of in the background, and his music, his songwriting, everything is just so incredible. Like, it's just super poignant. It's strong. It's visceral. It makes me. I mean, there's so many songs where it literally like hits my heart every single time I hear them. I'll put on I'll go to my Google Play library. I'll type in Tom Petty, and I own almost every single album he's put out. I'll put it on shuffle, and I'll literally just sit there with my eyes closed, Chris, and I will just think of memory after memory after memory of things that I was doing with my family, or trips that we were going on, or just it just transports me back into a place in a time. And like I've mentioned, Lynyrd Skynyrd, that's the group that me and my dad always bonded over. I always bonded with my mom over Tom Petty. It's still her favorite artist, and I remember like her finding out about it. She was pretty distraught, and I just want to give him his due. I think he's cool. I think his aesthetic is something that I really appreciate. It was always about simplicity, about really, really strong songwriting, about doing more with less. He was a phenomenal guitar player who always kind of downplayed his skills, and, an incredibly humble, interesting, just purely American artist. And I am going to miss the piss out of him, to be completely honest with you. Him and Prince, like, these last couple of years, like, it's just it's tough to deal with. It's tough to talk about. I know people just roll their eyes every time I keep talking about the same people, but this one hit me especially hard. It was one of the worst things that happened to me in 2017, and I'm still doing repairs to my house from the last hurricane, so that kind of tells you like how important he was to me. But I'm rambling, so what else have you got?
I've got a bunch more. Can I get a bunch more, and I'll get your reactions to them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that sort of your last big one that you had?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a bunch of names where it was more like I knew of them, but they didn't really have a lot of relevance to me. So like I said, if you would just want to go ahead and start rattling off, I'm going to
rattle some off, and I want to get your opinions on this. So as you know, I was a huge fan of Happy Days and Fonzie, and I loved all that stuff. And Erin Moran was on that show, and she played Joni, and she was an interesting person because she was very, very talented, and she was obviously a big part of my childhood because I loved Happy Days so much. And then she went on to do Joni's Love is Chachi, and then it got canceled, and then she's kind of I wouldn't say a sad story, but like just sort of an example of where child stars in Hollywood can just, sometimes not just go wrong. She never did anything wrong. She never got into drugs or anything like that, but she did become quite depressed because she couldn't find work and that sort of thing. And things just didn't go very well for her, and, I think maybe she did party a bit hard, but, she certainly didn't die from a drug overdose or anything like that, but she did die young last year. She was like 56 years old. And so that one was kind of sad because she was a big part of my childhood. You mentioned a couple other ones like Jerry Lewis and stuff like that. Judge Wapner died. Did you ever watch The People's Court?
Again, that's another pop culture reference where I know of it, but never actually watched it myself.
Oh, man, he was so cool because he was just like, when you watched The People's Court, and that was a staple in the 80s of pop culture. And when you watched that show, and this was before Judge Judy and all that crap came out, right? He was the original one. And the thing with him that made him so cool was you couldn't believe this guy was a judge. He just looked like someone's dad. It's like, hey, someone's dad is on the bench, like adjudicating all these cases, and it was kind of cool. I want to obviously we got to kind of give a mention to Adam West. It was before my time, that was in the '60s when he did Batman. It was before my time, but obviously, I was aware of him, and he was obviously a big deal in terms of pop culture. One that was kind of close to me is Heather Menzies. So Heather Menzies Urich was her name when she died. And so Heather Menzies she was in The Sound of Music. She played one of the kids, but the movie that she was in that just meant so much to me was in 1978, Piranha, the original Piranha. I love that movie, and she was in that. And something about her, I just really liked her a lot. And I liked that movie a lot. And then she went on to marry Robert Urich. And then what happened was Robert Urich got cancer. So they started this foundation, and then she ended up dying of cancer this year. So it was kind of a sad thing. But I always liked Heather Menzies. She was really cool. And she's Canadian too. So you got to like that.
That helps.
But a couple other ones I just want to mention briefly is Jim Nabors. So again,
I don't know who any of these people are.
So Jim Nabors, Yancy, was before my time. He was on the Andy Griffith Show. And you've heard of the Andy Griffith Show, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I had a lot of family that always called me Barney Fife.
Okay.
And because they said I looked like him when I was a kid, which was I assumed was hurtful. And then I went and looked it up, and yeah, it was quite hurtful that they would call me that.
Well, Jim Nabors played Gomer Pyle on that show. And I was actually at the 2000 and 2001 Indy 500 races with a buddy of mine. The guy, my buddy that's in radio in Toronto, Rob, he used to do the drops for us on the podcast.
Yep.
So he's like a huge auto racing fan, right? So he took me down to the Indy in 2000, 2001. And Jim Nabors opens up the race by singing Back Home Again in Indiana. And I was like, oh my God, I was just so pumped because Jim Nabors was there. And of all the things he did, though, my favorite, the one that meant a lot to me was he played Lugs Harvey in Stroker Race in 1983. It was a Burt Reynolds movie. It was like this dumb movie, but there's something about that movie I've always loved. He won a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Supporting Actor that year. But I just loved him as Lugs Harvey. He was just so likable. And I've got a question for you, Yancy.
Sure.
James Bond, right?
I've heard of him.
Who is your favorite James Bond? There's been lots of James Bonds over there. So who's your favorite?
I don't know. I guess Craig, just because I don't have a great relationship with the older Bond movies. I actually like the last couple ones that have come out, like the Quantum of Solace and Casino Royale. I thought that those were kind of cool, like low key. Bond was more like like less descript, kind of real feeling. It wasn't like super campy and fake, I guess. Does that make sense? I know it's not a sexy answer, but I guess it would be Daniel Craig. Yeah,
they always say that the best James Bond is the James Bond that you grew up with. Well, you know what? I grew up with Roger Moore, and he died last year. And in my mind, he was the best. And I'm not just saying that because I grew up with him. I've seen them all. I've seen all the Bonds, from the very first one, from Sean Connery right up to Craig. And Roger Moore was the best. There's no question. He brought humor to the role, but he was all those other things that makes James Bond James Bond. Like, he was cool, but he was tough. He was suave with the ladies. And I have another question for you. So what would you say your favorite James Bond movie is? You think it's like Skyfall or something like that, one of the more recent ones?
Man, I don't know, Chris. Honestly, I don't have a great relationship with it. I mean, I guess Casino Royale, just because there's so much like poker in it, and it's kind of like a cool
and recency
there's
bias.
multiple scenes with them playing cards and stuff. But yeah,
right. I guess because it was recent. Mine is For Your Eyes Only with Carol Bouquet, and Topol is in it, and Julian Glover was in that too. Who you millennials will know? He's from Game of Thrones. He was Grand Maester Pycelle, and I loved For Your Eyes Only. He's also in Star Wars too, isn't he, Julian Glover? I don't know if he might have been. I don't know. He could have very well have been. Yes, he was in The Empire Strikes Back. Yes. They're right. He had a little tiny role in that. That's right. Oh yeah, good one on you. Good on you. So, but Roger Moore, he was a good one for me. You mentioned Don Rickles. Don Rickles is one of the funniest human beings that ever lived. And I think if you had only knew Don Rickles from those, because back in this 50s and 60s, he did these like beach blanket movies. He was in a couple of those, and no, you can't watch that stuff. It's dumb. The stuff he did when he would do those, you know how they have celebrity roasts now? You know how they have the roast to Shatner and stuff? Well, back in the 60s, they used to do those as well. Even back in the 50s, they used to do them. And he was the grand master of all whoever ever did those roasts. Don Rickles was the best. I think you need to go on YouTube and find some Don Rickles stuff. He was so funny. There was something about his face, his look, his delivery, everything. He had it all. When he used to go on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, I would watch as a kid and laugh my head off. Do you remember watching, I'm just trying to think, Haverchuck?
Freaks and Geeks?
Freaks and Geeks. Thank you very much. Sorry, it escaped me there for a second. On Freaks and Geeks, there's a scene where Haberchuck, he's watching Gary Shandling, and he's laughing and laughing and laughing. I used to do that with Don Rickles. I'd watch Don Rickles on The Tonight Show and laugh and laugh and laugh, like falling off my chair. Don Rickles was so funny. Oh my God, he was good. But the last one that I just wanted to mention was one that you kind of mentioned earlier, but I think we got to give some more props here, if you don't mind. And that's,
sure, no,
and
absolutely.
I'd like to explain why this person is so important, and that's Mary Tyler Moore. So it was such a different time, Yancy. I'm telling you, back when I was a kid, like when I was in school, and I don't know if they still do this or not, but such a different time. When I was in school, something I always remembered was the female teachers were always referred to as Miss or Mrs., which told you right off what their marital status was. And it's like back in those days, you could only address a female, by stating whether or not they were married. It's just times were very, very different, Yancy. And so that's kind of like the situation of the way things were back then. And back then there was only a handful of TV stations, right? So creative control was basically centralized in the hands of a very, very small group of people made up pretty much entirely of old white men. And then along came Mary Tyler Moore and everything changed. Everything changed. Before that, men headlined TV shows. Men were the stars, and all the sitcoms used to take place in like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. That was it. And then along came Mary Tyler Moore. She was the star of the show. She was the headliner. It didn't take place in New York or LA or Chicago. It was in Minneapolis, of all places. And best of all, Mary was single, and a single working woman. And it sounds crazy to millennials. It'll sound nuts to you, but that was completely groundbreaking at the time. It was like, you just didn't see that. You didn't see a single working woman on TV. Like it just wasn't something you saw. And the coolest thing is that it wasn't just like this fad or this gimmick on TV. The show was amazing. Like it was really good. The Mary Tyler Moore Show is one of the best sitcoms in the history of television. It was so good, Yancy. Probably the single most influential television show in the history of the medium. And I'm not exaggerating.
Oh, wow.
I tend to exaggerate on a lot of things, but no, like it was unbelievably influential. The writing in it was so good. The actors that played all the parts were so good, and the way they interacted, and the fact that before that, the star was the star of the show. Mary Tyler Moore was the star of the show, but she shared screen time with everybody. She shared stories with everybody, and those people were important too. And it was just so good. I remember a couple of years ago, remember when TV Land, I don't think TV Land is around anymore, Yancy, but remember when TV Land was around and kicking? Did you ever watch TV Land?
I never really had cable growing up, but again, knew of it, but never personally had it.
Well, I remember a number of years ago, like maybe 10 years ago now, they did a tribute to her. And they had all these like celebrities come and do this big tribute to Mary Tyler Moore, and she was there, and all of her co-stars were there and stuff. And I remember, I'll never forget, Eric McCormack came out on stage and he sang a song to her, and it was just simply titled Mary Tyler Moore. And I'll never forget, as he's singing the song to her, he's just got these tears streaming down his face. And you had to realize, because you realize as you watch him singing that, Mary Tyler Moore influenced a generation of people, including him, including everybody. And her impact on TV will never, ever be equaled. I don't think ever, in my opinion. That's how important she was. So for me, I really, really wanted to give a shout out to her because she was one special person that we will never, ever forget. So do me a favor and go and look her up somewhere. I've got a DVD somewhere with some episodes. You know what I'll do? I'll courier it down to you. How's that? And just watch it. And I want to know what you think. I think we need to have a show on Mary Tyler Moore. I want you to watch it as a millennial. And it'll be interesting because you might look at it and go, oh, this is dumb. I don't like it. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you would. I think that you would probably acknowledge. I think we got to do this as a show because I really want to get your impression on that. So
I'd love to, because like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm just like I just mentioned her solely because I knew that she used to be famous and I wanted like bonus points or something. But I've heard her referenced so many different times. I've read so much stuff about her, about, like you said, she was more of a movement. She was more of like a just like a way to open doors for a lot of other people. And like you mentioned, like the whole like Mrs. versus Miss type of thing. I remember that whenever I was a kid in elementary school, I had this one teacher where if I said, I'm not gonna say her name, but I'd say like Miss, Smith or something, she'd always go Mrs. Smith, like really, really nasty. And I didn't even understand the distinction between the two. But like you said, it is weird that like a woman's identity used to be so tied up in the fact that, whatever her marital status was.
I know. That's just the way it was.
And entertainment. Yeah, opportunities in entertainment for like a single woman were really, really limited, and so I would love to. I'd love to revisit it, to find some old tapes or something, some old interviews, just old episodes of her show, and actually kind of see what the big deal was about, because I've heard her referenced so many times, and she was even in a Weezer song. You know what I mean? Like that's crazy, Buddy Holly. Like, what do you think about that? It's it's I don't know. It's one of those things where I feel like painfully ignorant to something that was obviously very, very important. You know what I mean? A lot of the stuff that you mentioned, Chris, like, no offense, it's like I said, it's deep cuts and it's stuff that is very, very specific to just you. But this is something that I know was big, and I know that I should know more about it.
So I'll educate you on it. Like I say, I'll make you watch it. I want to know a millennial's take on what you think of the quality of the show, the quality of the writing, kind of how everything kind of plays out, because it holds up. A couple of years ago, I was on a flight. I think I was heading down to New York for something, and one of the options was TV shows to watch. You had a screen in the seat in front of you, and so there was a Mary Tyler Moore episode, so I put it on and watched it. I was like, oh my God, is that show good? Man, all these many years later, it's still the best ever on TV. It's so good. Anyway, you want to maybe take some time now to do some trivia? I got some trivia. I got something different for you tonight. You want to try something new?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's go.
Fun with Yancy.
All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to mention a name. We're going to keep things very simple. I'm just going to throw a name out there, and all you got to do, Yancy, is tell me if they're alive or dead.
That's it?
That's it. Tell me, is this person alive or is this person dead? The first one that was on my list, you already kind of mentioned. So, you always throw it back to me whenever I kind of ruin your trivia questions. But the first one I was going to ask you about was Mel Brooks. And it's funny enough, you didn't know. You didn't even know. But so I would have got you with that one. Mel Brooks is alive. Yes, he is.
Very much alive.
I got one for you. Remember, this could be like any kind of celebrity, right? So this very, very famous opera singer, Luciano Pavarotti. He was a pop culture icon for many years. Is Luciano Pavarotti alive or dead?
I'm going to say he's dead.
He is. He died in 2007. Very good. Okay. Carlos Santana. I'm not talking about the baseball player. I'm talking about the guitar player. Carlos Santana.
Very much alive. Very much alive.
Very good. Yes, he is alive. Okay. Jackie Chan. Is Jackie Chan alive or dead?
He's very much alive as well.
Oh, very good. Okay, we're going to go with Pat Morita. Do you know who Pat Morita is?
I don't.
He was on Happy Days, but you'll know him especially as Mr. Miyagi. Pat Morita, alive or dead?
He is dead.
Yes, he is. 2005. Olivia Newton-John from Greece. Is Olivia Newton-John alive or dead?
I think she passed away just a few years ago, didn't she?
Oh, she'll be so disappointed to hear she's still alive.
Oh, this is dark.
Kirk Douglas. Is Kirk Douglas alive or dead?
He's alive.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
Grim Reaper is waiting in traffic. He's 101, but he's alive.
Wait, is he that old?
Oh,
Jesus.
yeah. Okay, so Ike Turner. You remember Ike Turner? Is Ike Turner alive or dead?
He is dead.
Yes, he is. 2007. Yes. Mickey Rooney. Little Mickey Rooney. Is Mickey Rooney alive or dead?
There's no way he's still alive.
Yeah, you're right. He died in 2014. What about Sidney Poitier? Oh, one of my favorite actors of all time was Sidney Poitier. Is he alive or dead?
I was going to say, is she still alive? So I obviously don't know who this is. So
You don't know who Sidney Poitier is? They call me
never
Mr. Tibbs. Oh, man, I tell you. Anyway, do you think Sidney Poitier is alive or dead?
I'm going to say alive.
Yes, you are correct.
Oh, thank God. I'm so glad to hear that.
You were once compared to this person, and that's Don Knotts. Okay? Is Don Knotts alive or dead?
Dead.
Yes, that is correct.
Rest in peace, Don.
Angela Lansbury. Is Angela Lansbury alive or dead?
Who is Angela Lansbury?
She was on Murder, She Wrote.
Oh, she's dead.
No, she's alive.
Oh,
one of your favorites of all time. One of your favorites of all time, Yancy. Fred Rogers. Is Fred Rogers alive or is Fred Rogers passed away?
Fred Rogers is unfortunately dead.
Yes, that's correct. Elizabeth Taylor, the great Elizabeth Taylor, the legendary Elizabeth Taylor, alive or dead?
Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago, didn't she?
Yes, she did. And finally, he died in Star Wars and came back as a ghost. But Sir Alec Guinness, is he alive or dead?
He is also dead.
Yes, he is. Okay, so you did pretty good. That was the darkest, most grimmest trivia we ever had. But
Chris,
you did very well.
This trivia is so twisted because you literally ask me if someone's dead, and then I'll say that somebody's dead, and you confirm it, and I'm excited. Like, yes, they're dead.
Yes! I nailed it. I got a point. Yeah.
This is weird. This is a weird social experiment for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know how it is. So you millennials, you're all like morbid. So I thought you'd like that kind of thing. So
well done.
Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to come back next week with a movie. So you're going to throw a movie at me. So have you thought about a title of a movie that you'd like me to watch and come back next week and discuss? And if so, what is it?
I have. This film is from 1998. I did not watch it whenever the year that it came out. In fact, I didn't watch this until I was maybe, 20, 21 years old. It is called Rounders. It is from 1998, like I mentioned. It stars Matt Damon, among a bunch of other characters, and it's basically about poker. It is a poker movie, and to make things even better, because this film kind of has like a cult status among people who've played poker, myself included, and as such, I'm going to bring on the worst poker player I have ever met, and that is Sammy, our buddy Sammy Reed. He's going to be coming on the show, and we're going to be talking Rounders.
Oh, nice. I like Sammy. Sammy's a good guy. He's been friends with us for a long time. So yeah, so Sammy's going to come on and talk about Rounders. So he obviously likes that movie, or is it just because he's such a bad poker player?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Little from column A, little from column B. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. Okay, so we'll get Sammy on here next week, and we will talk about Rounders. I do not know the movie. I have not seen it. I'm not even familiar with what it is, so I will give it a watch. I will see what it's like. We'll come back next week. We'll talk about that. Until then, this is Chris McBrien for Yancy Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter @CMcBrien or @Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.